Welcome to History 111, Lecture 21, The Rise of Mass Politics. Many people saw the election of Andrew Jackson and his inauguration as a change in American politics, and a mass of people descended on D.C. as supporters during his inauguration. Some people saw it as proof that he was the people's president, but when that party got truly out of control, other people saw it as evidence that Andrew Jackson was the king of the mob, and that he was really just a lowbrow president that really didn't deserve to be there and was only there because he commanded these great destructive masses. And Jackson ultimately becomes a decisive figure in politics. Now, he had a platform of expanding economic opportunity in the vote, and the vote really did change, but economic opportunity didn't. But what it really comes down to is Andrew Jackson is seen by his supporters as the people's president, and he's seen by his enemies as a dictator ruling a mob. Jackson's rise has a lot to do with trends that are happening in America. Now, over a lot of years, from about 1803 to 1840, you see that the number of white males that can vote is going up and up and up to the point where basically all white males can vote. Race is going to be removed as a barrier later, and gender later than that still. Now, at this point, states are going to decide who gets to vote, not the federal government. Now, most states during this time period limit the vote to white males who were taxpayers and own a minimum amount of property. The idea being that only those who pay should have any say, and that's the corollary of the idea of no taxation without representation, is there's no representation without taxation. So that means if you didn't pay taxes, you didn't get to vote. That was their theory, and that's going to ban most adults from voting. Now, the first steps towards expanding the electorate come in Ohio. Ohio comes into the Union with a constitution that guarantees all males the vote. Now, new western states are also going to follow that lead. Now, that's going to lead to older states doing the same for fear of a mass exodus of vital workers. The idea here being that if you have a combination of factors that are making you look at going west to a new state, if they start to reduce some, then it becomes less worthwhile. It's not a question of fixing everything, it's a question of just taking away a little bit of the incentive that might prevent some people from leaving. So it's kind of a token gesture. And it is one of those things that does slow migration, albeit not by a great degree. Well, there is a tendency in many states to expand the electorate. Not everyone agrees and feels this way. Daniel Webster, who's a major orator and politician at the time, is arguing that power flows from money, and some are responding to him that it was life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness in the Declaration of Independence, not life, liberty, and property like Locke had said. Now, while there's a debate, the expanding electorate happens, but to varying degrees depending on which state we're talking about. Now, one of the really important incidents in expanding the electorate is the Dorr Rebellion. Now, in Rhode Island, the constitution that existed barred over 50% of the male population from voting. So Thomas Dorr writes his own state constitution, which is overwhelmingly approved by people, and he sets up his own rival government in the state. He's eventually captured, and when he fails to take control of the state arsenal, and he and many of his followers go to jail. But this type of popular rebellion for voting rights really sort of shoves some states in the direction of expanding the electorate because they see it as a long-term problem. Now, there were some other problems with elections even when they were being expanded. Do realize that it's whites only and there's no secret ballot, so there's widespread bribery and intimidation with this, and also remember that women cannot vote as well. Another important factor in the rise of mass politics is a change in the party system. In the beginning, it was alliances of like-minded politicians. The terminology we use is largely invented after the fact. A lot of factions are known by different names. The Democrat-Republicans are a perfect example of that. And they're not formal parties. A lot of Americans in the very beginning were against the idea, but politics was revolving from factions right from the beginning. Now, Americans by the time of Jackson are starting to begin to feel that parties are not just necessary, but they're also desirable, and who really gives a voice to that is a man named Martin Van Buren. And what he says is, without political parties, only a small political elite will rule, and that had really been the case at the beginning of the Republic. And now, by the time we're at Jackson, we're to a point where the revolutionary elite are largely dead or past the age where they'll be seeking office. So we're in a point where the natural elite of the country is gone, and now what do? And Van Buren says political parties are the only alternative. And what he says is people should be loyal to their party, and the leadership of that party should use favors and rewards to promote members with potential. That means that there should be a route for anyone who was loyal and hardworking into the higher echelons of the party. Whereas in the previous time period with the revolutionary elite, it was closed. You were either a founding father or you weren't. And now this is a route for everybody in. Now, he says also, as long as there's two parties, they're going to act as a check and balance against each other to ensure that the will of the people is carried out. In other words, having a political party system allows everyone to participate and everyone to have a chance. In the previous generation, only those real revolutionary elite could rule. And so people start to buy into this, and that's going to really contribute to the rise of mass politics. Now, Jackson's followers in particular are anti elitist in nature, and they embrace the idea of this whole route into politics and embrace the idea of rejecting having a small elite. And they're going to call themselves Democrats. And also, what's going to happen is the other political faction, the anti Jackson faction, is going to align themselves and they're going to eventually adopt the nickname Whigs. That's from a Scottish term that refers to someone who rebels against tyrants. And the tyrant in this question is going to be Andrew Jackson. Now, the political principles that Andrew Jackson put forward were equal protection for all, although realize that when he said that, he was not including natives, African Americans, or women. It was equal protection for all white men in Andrew Jackson's mind. He also believed in the spoil system. Now, Jackson institutionalized existing trends. That was, presidents would come in and replace political appointments with their supporters rather than using appointments based on merit. That was already the case. Jackson did not do this more than any other president. Although the people he removed and replaced tended to be ones who were engaged in corruption, and the replacements were often his supporters. But he was the first person to publicly endorse the idea that he could replace any federal official he wanted with anyone he wanted because he was the president and it was his right. Today it's so common that it's expected. When there's an election, every major federal official knows that they're going to go ahead and be replaced as soon as the new incoming president has a chance to make appointments. And that's just a given. For Andrew Jackson, he actually came out and said it. Before Andrew Jackson, it was happening, but it was something that was kind of dealt with quietly. One important thing to note also is this is really going to lead to the rise of Martin Van Buren and the acceleration of his career. And his ideas about political parties had really found resonance with Jackson and his supporters. And as a result, he has a very promising career as Secretary of State under Jackson during the first term. Now, Van Buren is going to become vice president during Jackson's second term. And what we're going to see with this long term is this is where we start to see a pattern of vice presidents getting the next nomination. This is where the vice president becomes seen as someone who can take over for the president in the long run. That's a pattern that takes a little bit of time to set in, but it really kind of starts with Van Buren. Now, what's the big idea here? Well, first and foremost, there's a period where there's an anti-elitist streak and an expanding electorate. The poor are now included, but we should note that many people are still left out, in particular women, African Americans, and Native Americans. But most importantly, political parties are now seen as something good and desirable. See you in the next lecture.